Hi everybody, my name is Jacob Garza and we're here recording episode 7. I'm glad that you guys can join us here for this episode. My co-host Rogelio, he went ahead and produced the last episode and I'm going to be doing this one solo. We're running a little behind schedule on this episode because I ended up getting sick after all the fun and excitement we had over E-Week this last 2 weeks. And here in February, it's a pretty exciting time here in the Valley when we celebrate that, and I've been told by everyone who attends from out of town that it's the best engineers week in the nation, and no one does it quite like we do down here. So for this episode, we're going to go over some of the, hidden costs that sometimes people run into when they find cheap land or they find a great deal and they think the land that they have is a price that's too good to be true, the best deal in town. And sometimes it can be, but sometimes it might not be. So we're going to try to go through some of those things here. So to start off with, cheap land is typically never cheap. It's just there's a lot of things that haven't been paid front, and you're going to have to pay for them further down the line. Now, think of a home. Whenever you build a pool, or you build a fence, or you build that backyard, outdoor kitchen that you want, you invest, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 into these projects. When you sell your home, assuming you built it $50,000 pool, and you have a $300,000 home or $400,000 home, your home doesn't sell for $350 or $450 because you build a $50,000 pool. It may go up $20,000, but no one's gonna pay you the value of the pool that you chose to install in the home. You might get lucky and someone might pay closer to what you paid, but in reality, there's usually a sunk cost to these types of amenities that you add into a piece of land. And so it's kind of a similar concept here. Typically for most pieces of land, typically land that already has utilities and everything, when someone else comes and buys it, you're getting a better deal than if you had to put it in yourself. That's usually how it ends up going, because if you have to put the utilities yourself, it's very expensive. So a lot of those real costs, if you're not careful, they end up showing up after you've already found and located a property you like. It's in the perfect area. You think this is a great place to build a subdivision, or this is the best place for you to put that market, or commercial building that you really want, or apartment building. Location's great, the land is the right price, and then you find out that there's no sewer. And closest location is 2 miles away. You're gonna have to put a lift station, and suddenly your project is $1 million more expensive, and a lot of people end up having to face during development if they're not careful. So the other big major problem that we've found is foundation. A lot of people purchase land and they don't realize that property is subject to flooding, and sometimes remediating that is a lot of cost. Might not necessarily be a floodplain it's delineated, but it doesn't mean just because it's not delineated that you don't have floodplain on your property. And so those are all questions and things that need to be looked at. I think it's step by step. The first thing you're looking at land is to focus so much on finding the cheapest land, finding most economic route to getting the product that you want. So some things to look at, some things that tend to hook buyers is that the low cost of investment, because the land is cheap, makes it feel like it's easy for you to go ahead and get hooked on the piece of property. And ultimately, the psychological trap in that you feel like you're getting a great deal, and so it's not kind of hard to go against that feeling sometimes, especially if you've done 1 or 2 projects similarly where you found a great piece of land at a great deal, and it turned out it was not just a great deal, but it had water and sewer and everything. You've gotten lucky in the past. You'd be trapped in the gambling addiction of going to a casino and first time, and you and you come out with a huge win. You go to Vegas and you come back with $5,000 in your pocket, and you're already planning your next trip to Vegas the next day because you were so successful on your first trip, and next 3-4 trips you end up losing $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 each time, and Vegas won. The house always makes their money back, and it's kind of gamble that you take on times just trying to go for the lowest price. So I guess the thing to look at, looking at land, where is the sewer, where is the water, where the floodplain area is inundated. Understanding the area you're investing is pretty important as well. If you it might not be something normal, but for example, my colleague Rogelio done this, and whenever there's a huge storm event, he gets in his vehicle and drives around all the roads in town. He spends entire day, all day, driving down as many roads as he can area. Why does he do this? Because he wants to see where there's flooding. He wants to know what are the areas that are most impacted. Heavy rains. It helps us understand that whenever we look at a piece of land or develop something, that even though the floodplain doesn't show that there's floodplain there, that there could still be inundations in the area. And so it's important, things like that. And that's not something I think the average person is doing. And it's not something we expect the average person or investor or developer to do. Something that we do because we have clients that are investing in the area. And other, I guess, to look at is power. We recently a subdivision that someone else developed the subdivision, someone else did the engineering. I'm not going to any shade or focus on this property because I'm sure the engineer did his due diligence. It was probably more developer pushed here, but this property had no access to power, and we know that this property was basically developed and constructed over a year ago. Just recently, we obtained an easement to obtain power into that subdivision. Saying that was a misstep by the engineer or anybody. Maybe it's viable for them. Who knows? Maybe the developer is making great money on this project. I say he could have gotten a fantastic deal on this property, and so it'd still be a great deal for that developer. But the reason I'm saying power is because that property had no access to power, and even though it was sat there basically without being able to build lots for over a year because they couldn't get access. After a year, they finally did get access, and I'm not sure how much the easement and bringing that power cost them. It must have not been cheap. Those are some of the things that sometimes we may overlook. You get a great deal and you have water and you have sewer, and oh wow, we have our wet utilities, somewhere to drain, flooding, and they move forward with everything, and then oh hey, provide you power because we don't have to reach your property. It's a real that can happen. So some of the things that sometimes are overlooked, and sometimes coming to an agreement provider more difficult than doing the engineering, and obtaining easements is a very difficult and sometimes lengthy process. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much you offer, make a deal. People just don't want anybody in their land. We had a project, outfall option, was perfect. Got in an easement, could potentially lower the cost of subdivision by like maybe $30,000. Talking with the owner of that property, it didn't seem very related to want to an easement. So we made the decision that it was likely not going to be worth our time and effort to try to convince them to go around property. Ultimately, the best choice, most economic choice. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Time is sometimes more important. It can be between for their bankers, yourself, paying interest on the loan. Those are all things that are into play when you're those types of decisions. The property that we had, the property seemed a little bit expensive, $1 per acre. It was a little bit more than I would say 5% more than market. So that was a property that probably overlooked. Someone didn't have a developer's eye. One that has a developer's eye, we snatched it up immediately as soon as we saw it went to sell. Was that this property, original detention pond next to it, is that we didn't have to build an on-site. Huge savings. Construction. That means that we can get 1 or 2 extra lots, potentially be a few tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars more, in the low hundreds value from resale, to build a detention pond there to hold water. That's something to look at. Project that we have, bought another property very hit the market, and the reason was for this one was we had and the entire property was facing this roadway, and the roadway itself allows to be built along it. So all we were having to do was so this property, fairly priced, maybe slightly above. I wouldn't even say slightly above. It was just around market price. The problem was that half of it had floodplain. So that's being that we're working through. But the property that doesn't have floodplain enough to pay the rest of the property, even if able to remove the floodplain deal. Thinking of the other thing to consider is the cost of talked about utilities, but building roads is also very expensive, in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars for a small roadway. Divisions, even if you're talking about just a perfect square 10 acre with a single cul-de-sac, spend a few $100,000 on the roadway. And so if you can avoid having to build a roadway, if you have a lot of frontage, thing to look at. We found a property. This one was a great deal down because it had a 5-foot easement, basically like a private easement, allowed you to access 20 acres, and you need 50 feet. For county, it's usually 60. Get access to vision, and so found that land because of that. A great deal. It'll make a great ranch. Maybe some other type of use type. There may be some creative things to do there. Division wasn't viable product, and that was really what we were looking to do. So, we ended up not pursuing that property and have that so that fire trucks can come in and give services, anybody that requires them. So ambulance, police, they all have to be able to reach all the properties, and sometimes in a 25-foot easement that might not be enough for a fire truck to be able to make those turns in there safely and get in. That a lot of people may not consider is things nature. Recently, of our clients for a subdivision, we gave them a call, basically in the process of construction, and they got their loan. We called and we told them, hey, where we got the final numbers for the fees for the city and for the rights, and 150, 100 or $200,000. We were like, I don't have $200,000. How am I going to pay for that? The bank already approved numbers you guys told me. And then we were like, oh, don't worry. The numbers that we sent your bank, they already included for these fees. They were very relieved after that. They were freaking out because the loan that they applied for only included the construction costs and like a little bit of surplus for emergency or whatever. But in the numbers to the bank, we did include those fees, and if included the construction costs, a big problem for our client, and our client in this case be overwhelmed by these fees that were being blindsided by, but ultimately because those fees were accounted for. Have the final numbers yet because they calculated Once final costs are submitted, a number of fees are calculated at that point based on construction costs. You're a developer and you weren't planning for that, and you were planning to finance this project yourself. You saw your contractor told you, oh, it's $1 million to construct, and you're going, okay, and you put together $1 million somehow. You borrow from your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, and somehow you scrape $1 million together, and then you're like, I'm going to start, and then your engineer tells you, hey, well, it's $1 million to construct, but you also need another 200,000 to the cities. Freak out as well, and you're going to get another 20% of your entire project value that are the cost of that happen. Those delays are in our control. Sometimes are necessary, but a little bit longer, and it's not. Sometimes they have to hire third parties. They're overwhelmed as well. They may have one or two reviewers, and they may have 100 applications coming in. Difficult for them to review everybody and everything going on at the same time. We do with one of our projects where we didn't hear back for almost 2 months or 3 months, and even tense, but we were paid to from their reviewer, and finally the approval. Sometimes in additional costs, especially if you took out a loan to purchase the land, you're paying interest every month. So the main things, utilities, right away, access, floodplain, fees that you weren't aware of, delays, provisions sometimes happen. We have a project where the water not in that location. Once we went out with the writer to the field, they mentioned to us that there was a section that didn't have water line. They turned and came back one block further down the road. So we were actually planning to cross that road water line. And we changed our whole water line because now we had to and bring a water line. It was better just to go ahead and extend it on our side of the road. And so our plans because of that, and that delayed in the next couple weeks because of that. Multiple names under one name. You have a parent that passed away, or a relative that passed away, and your entire sisters, cousins, a piece of land, and now you have 10 owners for one piece of land to sign off on the sale or on the development. So it's better to consolidate that and reduce costs. Get a cheap piece of land. Ideal. It's the best. Lower your costs, but a lot of times the land could be 20% of the entire project. And now the land was worth maybe 33% of the entire project deal for that land, and then we have another one where it's going to be worth 10%, and that was still a great deal. So you should really focus on isn't necessarily on the cheapest land, but the value of your property you're bringing out versus and just focusing on the land is the cheapest thing. Roadways are very expensive. Mitigation is very expensive. But those are probably the three biggest eaters. If you have to ruin your project, you're building a lot subdivision in 6 months or a year. The price of this land from 100,000 to 400,000, and let's say after 6 months of negotiating or a year of negotiating, he brings that price down, and then you save 20%. You saved $100,000. Start doing the engineering, and you get through everything, and you're a year down the road. Everything was perfect. There, the water was there, the sewer was there, and the approval flyer pop up. It says 100 lot subdivision opening right across the street from you. So 50 lots someone who's selling 500 lots at start before you at the point that you're looking to sell, and the same size lots that you're trying to make. And you closed on that deal immediately. You may have already been done with your construction at this point, already been selling as well. You may have gotten all your 50 lots out, and before this other guy started announcing his subdivision clear, and yeah, it would have cost you $100,000 more. Now you're gonna end up having a lot more trouble selling the land. You're gonna have to maybe even lower your price on all the lots that you're selling by $2,000-$3,000 times 50 lots. You're talking about $150,000. That's the extended amount of time. It may cost you $250,000. Isn't always the best deal. I guess lessons learned or things considered. This episode helps. I hope you guys learning, and if you questions, always feel free to reach out to us at Garza Hernandez Engineering or at Primera Land. We're always to find great economic deals that make sense, and but that are a good value for ourselves and for our clients.